How does ocean acidification happen? Well, in the 200 plus years since the Industrial Revolution began, the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has increased due to human actions. During this time, the pH of surface ocean waters has fallen by 0.1 pH units. This might not sound like much, but the pH scale is logarithmic, so this change represents approximately a 30% increase in acidity. The two biggest sectors contributing to greenhouse gas emissions are the transportation and electricity sectors. Combined, they represent nearly 55% of greenhouse gas emissions. If we break it down by country, China is the biggest contributor to greenhouse gases, almost double that of the United States. As you can see in this graph, while we have slowly decreased our carbon emissions, China has rapidly increased theirs as they've industrialized. This is also due to the fact that in China, nearly 58% of the total energy comes from coal, and since coal is rich in carbon, burning it in China's power and industrial plants and boilers releases large amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere. So how does ocean acidification affect the ocean? Well, carbon dioxide, which occurs naturally in the atmosphere, dissolves into seawater. Water and carbon dioxide form carbonic acid, a weak acid that breaks into hydrogen and bicarbonate ions. As ocean acidification increases, available carbonate ions bond with excess hydrogen, resulting in fewer carbonate ions available for calcifying organisms like oysters, clams, and corals to build and maintain their shells, skeletons, and other calcium carbonate structures. If the pH gets too low, shells and skeletons can even begin to dissolve. The pteropod, or sea butterfly, is a tiny sea snail about the size of a small pea. When pteropod shells were placed in seawater with pH and carbonate levels projected for the year 2100, the shells slowly dissolved after only 45 days. Researchers have already discovered severe levels of pteropod's shell dissolution in the Southern Ocean, which encircles Antarctica. All kinds of organisms eat them, from tiny krill to fish to whales, and other animals like seals rely on the fish that eat the pteropods. These sea butterflies are also a major food source for the North Pacific juvenile salmon, which we humans enjoy. When these organisms are at risk, the entire food web may also be at risk. So how does ocean acidification directly affect our lives? Well, seafood is widely consumed by Americans. Shrimp tops the list at around 4.6 pounds per person. Salmon comes in second at around 2.5 pounds per person. Both of these are going to be affected by ocean acidification. One study conducted by a small team of researchers shows that rising ocean acidification will likely cause shrimp to taste bad in the future. Another researcher, Chase Williams, exposed young coho salmon to the elevated ocean CO2 levels expected over the next few decades. He then dropped in an odor that normally makes the fish react as if a predator is near. The fish ignored it. Another giant thing that will be affected when ocean acidification levels rise is the Great Coral Reefs. Dr. Janice Lowe had this to say, quote, "There are many more examples of the world's coral reef system under threat, but in the individual reefs within the Great Barrier Reef, described as one of the 7 natural wonders of the world, are at most risk from the acidifying oceans." Corals in the One Tree Reef began building their skeletons faster once the scientists artificially restored the pH of the seawater to pre-industrial levels after only a period of 15 days. So how can we fix this? Well, the most recent National Climate Assessment projects that by taking action now, we could avoid steep declines in fish catch potential and thus reducing harm to fisheries. The IPCC reports highlights that with significant emissions reductions, 30% of coral reefs would be spared from extinction. Chevron and ExxonMobil, the 4th and 5th biggest producers of greenhouse gas emissions, both plan to increase their carbon emissions by 2025. I encourage people to vote for representatives that endorse legislation to prevent these American companies from increasing their CO2 emissions. We should also consider putting tariffs on China's, Russia's, and Saudi Arabia's state oil and coal companies, which are the top producers of greenhouse gas emissions. The saying reduce, reuse, recycle can also apply to the ocean acidification crisis. Using less products and energy will lead to a decreased demand to create new product out of new materials. Every person should be able to think of a way that they can consume less product and energy in their daily lives. Thank you so much for listening. Okay.